living as strangers in a foreign place, in a place that we don't know all the hidden rules, the hidden curriculum, all these manners and customs. It can be very difficult. It can be challenging. It can even be uncomfortable and awkward and embarrassing. I remember a story I was told about two young missionaries who went to a foreign country to serve. And when they got there, they immediately started exploring the culture, and they found this, we would call it a fruit smoothie, but it was a fruit drink that was enjoyed by the locals, and they loved it. And so everywhere they went, they'd be carrying and drinking it. It was a novelty to them, and they really enjoyed it. And they started to notice they were getting looks, and people were almost avoiding them after a short period of time. Well, what they found out was these fruit smoothies that they loved so much and considered just a local beverage had a place in folk medicine, and they were intended, or the folklore, or at least the local understanding was that these were helpful in recovering or avoiding the consequences of some very questionable moral choices you might have made the night before. And so as they carried these drinks around, what people saw was a pair of young women who were living very recklessly, very immorally, because obviously they needed to be drinking these drinks. It was an innocent mistake, but it illustrates very powerfully how living as strangers can be a very difficult, challenging, and I say awkward, embarrassing thing. We are aliens and strangers in this world. That's what Peter says in 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 11 to 17. Let me read it for you right now. Hear the word of the Lord. Dear friends, I urge you as aliens and strangers in the world to abstain from sinful desires which war against your soul. Live such good lives among the pagans that though they accuse you of doing wrong, they may see your good deeds and glorify God on the day he visits us. Submit yourselves for the Lord's sake to every authority instituted among men, whether to the king as the supreme authority, or to governors who are sent by him to punish those who do wrong and to commend those who do right. For it is God's will that by doing good you should silence the ignorant talk of foolish men. Live as free men, but do not use your freedom as a cover-up for evil. Live as servants of God. Show proper respect to everyone. Love the brotherhood of believers. Fear God and honor the king. This is the word of the Lord, and we thank God. Praise be to God for his word to us. Christianity does shape culture. It can transform society. But it doesn't do that as our hope for the future. God's promise is not that this world will be transformed. This world will be burned by the flame, and a new world is coming. That's why I think often we're too optimistic about God's purposes and plans for society in general. If you read the book of Revelation, the Apocalypse to John, it's going to get worse before it gets better. If you read what Jesus says, that the gospel brings a sword even into households, dividing parents and children, brothers from one another, sisters from one another, communities are divided by the gospel, so long as sinners live alongside the saved. There will be cultural conflict, and people will not honor God in word or deed, in attitude or in action. As you can already see, I am in danger of going way beyond what Peter's talking about here as we think about these ideas and things. And we do need to think biblically about them. So for this morning, let's stick to the text. Let's go through verse by verse, idea by idea, and we'll pull out a few things that Peter says that inform our conversation. And that way you're not hearing my ideas. You're hearing what God has said. A faithful preacher does not get up and say, here's what I say. He gets up and say, let's together hear what God has said. So let's do that this morning. 1 Peter chapter 2, verses 11 to 17. And notice right off the bat, Peter sets the tone for us. And this is one of the main themes of the book of 1 Peter. Remember, at the very beginning of the text, in 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 1, he says, Peter, an apostle of Jesus Christ, to God's elect, strangers in the world. We are strangers in this world. And so Peter begins by saying our life here and now, being a citizen of Canada or the United States, being a Roman citizen, being a Hebrew who lives in the area of Judea, being a Gentile who lives in Judea. These geographic, socio-political terms are all shaped for us by the overarching reality, by the bigger, deeper, more powerful truth that we are citizens of heaven and children of God. Brothers and sisters, dear friends, I urge you as aliens and strangers in the world to abstain from sinful desires that war against your soul. We are strangers in this world. There is conflict at the very heart of our living here. And yet God leaves us here to live as citizens of heaven and witnesses here in this world. Our citizenship here is shaped by the fact that we are not ultimately citizens here. So live to honor your King. We are to live such good lives among the pagans that though they accuse us of doing wrong, they see our good deeds and they glorify God when he returns and visits us. That is Peter's first point. It is the overarching point. In fact, not just for this passage, but as we follow through in what comes in chapter 2, that is going to be the overarching theme. We are citizens of heaven, so live like it. Honor your King in every aspect of your life. Second, we notice that social systems and civic government in this world have their authority by God's providence. God has ordained that these rulers will rule, that these governors will govern. And so we honor them because we belong to King Jesus. Submit yourself for the Lord's sake to every authority instituted among men, whether to the king as the supreme authority or to governors who are set by him to punish those who do wrong and commend those who do right. In many ways, I think Peter's situation was almost easier than ours because we have become part of the political process in a democratic society. But the fact remains, God, in his purpose for human history, by his will, has established these systems and structures that governors may govern and rulers may rule. And we honor our King, King Jesus, by recognizing the authority of those established by human government. Now, you'll notice that Peter says, for those people have been sent to punish those who do wrong and commend those who are doing good. And I think we need to think about that idea very quickly here. First, doing good, commending those who do good, and punishing those who do wrong. Peter's not talking about evil and good in the broadest sense. All evil and all good. And I can demonstrate that with a very simple example from the text. The king that Peter speaks about has not been established by God, or at least his authority does not rest on his compliance to God's perfect will. The king that Peter is talking about will not honor God perfectly by his reign and his governance and his ruling over these people. We know that for a fact. The governor, the king that Peter is talking about here, himself demands veneration from his people, which is in direct conflict from the fact that Christ alone is king. God alone is worthy of our worship. The pagan Caesar does not honor God with all he says and all he does. The good that exists here, in a practical sense, the good that kings have been establishing, the good that governors keep in force, is general civic good, the good of society. And we recognize there are times where they fail even in that limited capacity. When kings are become tyrants, where governors allow injustice to become part of the system. We need to recognize that Peter is establishing a general principle for civil society. In general, kings have been established to do good, and they have been sent to keep those who do evil from running amok. So, we do not defy kings simply because they do not follow God's established pattern for holiness. God has said, this is what I demand from you, people. This is what holiness looks like. And in particular in the law, God shows us what holiness looks like as a society. We do not have the right to say, because the kings do not love God, we will no longer follow them. And if you want to see how that works itself out, look in the Old Testament to those faithful Hebrews who served under foreign kings, most of whom did not honor God, did not worship him, did not serve him as the one true living God. And yet those Hebrews were commended in their service, recognizing the authority of the king. So, social systems, civic governors in this world have authority granted to them by God's will. It is God's purpose for society to thrive under human authority. That's what Peter says. He goes on then to say in verse 15, for it is God's will that by doing good you should silence the ignorant talk of foolish men. So this is the founding principle for social change as Christians. This is the bedrock of how we influence culture and society. And I'm going to get to say a bit more about that in a second. But listen, Peter's command for us here is that living the grace and goodness of the gospel is the foundation of changing culture and society. We live such good lives that we silence the talk of ignorant and foolish people. It's the bedrock, it's the foundation. And that is not to say we don't operate at higher levels as well. That we don't seek to influence society and culture beyond our own quiet, good lives. Christians should not stand by quietly as tyrants rule, as evil is celebrated, and justice is codified in the laws and systems of the land. We should not be silent when that happens. However, Peter's emphasis here, and I think it has to be the bedrock and foundation for all that we do as Christians, seeking to change the world around us and influence it for the gospel of Jesus Christ. The foundation, and Peter's emphasis here, is that we live the sort of freedom, holiness, and justice that legitimizes our witness in broader cultural conversations, that shows the truth and power of the gospel of our King Jesus to a watching world. If we have not got this right, 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 15, if we have not lived such good lives as God wills, if we have not lived such good lives that we can silence the talk of ignorant men, nothing we do above that, no broader cultural movement, no petitioning, no work to shift the balances and to undo the corruption, none of it will have an impact because the foundation has crumbled away and gone. For it is God's will that by doing good you should silence the ignorant talk of foolish men. We then move on to the next verse, the next series of verses that say, live as free men, but do not use your freedom as a cover-up for evil. Live as servants of God. Love the brotherhood. Show proper respect to everyone. Love the brotherhood of believers. Fear God. Honor the King. As citizens of heaven, we realize that we have been set free to live without fear of condemnation. To live without fear that we will somehow get it wrong and not measure up. Jesus has set us free. Paul loves to talk about our freedom in Christ. But Paul too, just as Peter does here, warns us immediately that freedom can become a stumbling block to us and to others if it is abused, if it is not lovingly executed. As we bring conclusion to some of these thoughts, as we wrap it all up and begin to think how we can apply these things to our own lives, let me use the illustration of a parent sending their child to visit at a friend's house. We, Peter says, are aliens and strangers in this world. When a parent sends their child for a play date, they do it trusting that their son or daughter is going to go and they're going to use their best manners because they're a guest in that home. They go and they send their child expecting that that child, when they get to the house, is going to listen to the parents who are there. That they're going to follow the house rules. If they take their shoes off at the door, that their visiting child will take the shoes off at the door. That if they sit down for a meal and eat, they're going to eat a little bit of everything, even if it's not their favorite. They're going to politely eat what's given to them. They're going to follow the rules of that home. And also, the parent trusts that when that child at another home is encountering something that's not right, that's not okay. Maybe the television comes on and we're not allowed to watch that show at their house. They're going to say, listen, I'm not really comfortable with this. We're not allowed to watch this show. I'm not allowed to do this. We're not allowed to do this activity. And that they're going to have the integrity to still do what's right. Do you hear how that parallels our living as foreigners and strangers in this world? We have been sent by our Father to live, to visit. And so we carry with us the honor of our family as we go as visitors. We, number one, remember our manners, and we continue to do good. We, number two, listen to the house rules, and out of respect for the house in which we visit, we follow the house rules. We leave our shoes at the door. And number three, when the house rules conflict with our King Jesus' rules, with mom and dad's rules, we gently and graciously say, no, we can't do that thing. We can't follow that path. We serve King Jesus. He is a wonderful king. You could not ask for a better king. One who loves his people, one who gave himself up for them. Let's honor our king as we live as aliens and strangers in this world. God bless.